When I read that question, I thought, what a good question. Because people do treat them as two separate things. And as long as they both yield information, as long as the information is not interpreted together, you're losing an opportunity to learn something a little bit more complete about student learning. I also like to talk about not only large-scale and classroom-based assessment, but formative and summative assessment, because large-scale information can be used formatively or summatively. Classroom assessment can be used formatively or summatively. You cross them, you get 4 different kinds. But to the point about large-scale, the large-scale assessments typically give you information about broad learning outcomes. Reading in general, math in general. Classroom assessments give you information about elements of that, not all math, but can the student do a certain kind of problem? Or not all reading, but can the student find the main idea in this passage? And you need both kinds of information to improve education. You need to know in general strengths and weaknesses, but that's not instructionally actionable. I learned yesterday that you have an achievement test you give high school students for entry into college, and it tests math and many sciences. So there might be one question about a whole area of math or a whole area of biology. That will place a student, and it will give information for admissions, but it's not detailed enough to know what is the student good at in math and what does he still need to work on in math. For that information, you need finer grained, more detailed information, which comes from classroom assessment. Because when you actually do instruction, you need to know exactly what to teach, not just all of math or all of reading. So the biggest difference in the kind of information is grain size, the domain that you can generalize the assessment information to. That's a bad sentence in English, but is it big or is it small? And a teacher would say, I need the small stuff. I need to know what exercise the student needs to learn. I need to know what explanation he needs to hear. I need to know what to ask him to tell me. And for larger policy decisions or educational administration decisions, you don't want all that detail. You want a general indicator of math or reading. So that, and you need both, obviously. You can't, they both serve good purposes, and you can't do the whole enterprise of school without both. But they do need to talk to each other. And often people keep them separate, like your question suggested. And if you put them together, you get much richer information. Then when you add the layer of, and is this information going to be to improve things, a formative purpose, or is it going to be to judge things in a good way, but to evaluate where we are now? That gives you even more assessment information purposes. And when educators are aware that there are all those purposes happening at once, and they can get the right information for the purpose they need to serve, you make better decisions, better educational decisions. And sometimes the large-scale information will raise more questions than it answers. Like, oh, math is strong in this school. I wonder why. Or, oh, reading is weak in this school. I wonder why. And for that, that will drive you to the more classroom-based information to see, well, what exactly did they do, and how did they do on it? So, if you can get questions raised in one area answered by the other area, you get a deeper, richer picture of what's going on and what you should do about it. It's another good question. I actually have just done a literature review. It's not published yet, about the use of formative assessment in teacher education classes, which is only one part of higher education. But I can tell you, not just in my experience, but in the international literature, it can be used in teacher education. It is used, but it must be rare, because you will find an article about this wonderful project where we did this formative assessment in our class, and they still talking about it as if it was something new and worthy of research publication. So that means it's not routine in classrooms yet. There is evidence in some of the studies I've just referred to that it can be very effective, and by effective I mean that the students learn more, they do better. And there's also evidence that if it's not done well, which new things sometimes are not done well, that it doesn't necessarily have to make a difference, that it does need to be done well. I would say that, judging from that, I would bet that in other areas of higher education, while there are some probably people trying out this new, it's not really all that new anymore, late 80s, how long ago was that, 20, almost 30 years now? But relatively new method is still not routine in classrooms. So how can we, the second part of your question, how can we make it more routine? And this is from my experience, and also from my experience as a higher ed teacher. I still do have some classes, and what usually turns the corner for people is when they use formative assessment, starting with helping the students see what they're trying to learn, so that the learning outcomes are not just the teacher's vision, but the student knows where they're going. And then formative assessment along the way to help them see how they are doing and what they still need to do, and not just in the sense of how many correct answers, but what they're thinking. When you see students get into that, and when you see students able to regulate their own learning and to be more focused on a goal as if it was their goal, not just complying with the goal because you asked them to. And most teachers enjoy seeing their students learn. So that for a lot of people is what turns the boat. They end up wanting to do things that they see students find useful and also empowering, because in the long run, after your course is over, you're gone. And what's important is what the students can still do with the material you try to teach them. And if they have taken some ownership of what they want to know, what they need to do about that, and have become clear enough on the criteria for good work that they can do a little self-assessment, and then they can keep learning in that topic when you're gone, which is what you want. Especially in higher ed, people tend to be very, they like their discipline. They went into it because it's a topic of interest to them. So to be able to develop some capability among students to actually work in a discipline themselves instead of, it doesn't sound like a big difference. You know, an outcome could be, okay, you want to pass the final exam, old traditional. Of course you do. But if in addition you want to be able to pass the final exam, because that would show that you know something about the chemistry you're studying, from the point of view of the learner, inside the learner's head, that's huge. So it's not, I'm just doing this now because, my learned professor asked me to. It's, I'm doing this now because I see what I'm learning. That's a very big difference from the learner's point of view. And when teachers see that I helped them do that, that's very empowering. But you have to experiment with it a little bit. So the hard part is that first getting people to try something long enough that they can see some results, because the results tend to be they tend to be self-reinforcing. That's the wrong word, but they help people want to do more of it. So getting them to try it, getting them to understand it, getting professors to change their minds from what am I going to teach to what are my students trying to learn. That's the big deal. So I guess the summary is, yes, it's done. Sometimes it's done very well, but it's still written up like it's some big new deal. And that means it's not routine yet, but it could be. It could be.